Welcome to the Intelligent Estate, where luxury meets smart living. I'm your host, Travis Leo, and I'll be your guide into the world of cutting-edge technology, architectural elegance, and what it truly means to live intelligently in today's most extraordinary homes. Today's topic is lighting and its role in new modern architecture. Everywhere you go, you see new companies popping up offering, quote, intelligent lighting solutions. There's a lot of players in this space and a lot of confusion, so we're going to dive in. We're fortunate to be joined by an industry expert from South Florida who has years of experience in procuring, designing, installing, programming, and servicing high-end lighting systems in some of the most luxurious residences in that area. Carlton Fiorentino is the president of IoT, a company that is reinventing the concept of luxury living. We're pleased to have him today. Carlton, welcome to the Intelligent Estate. In 30 seconds or less, give us your background and the background on how IoT became a leading technology firm in the greater Miami area.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I've been doing this for about 15 years, and one of my greatest passions of all of the categories that we take care of is really lighting. And so it's an honor to be here. It's very exciting. We put a lot into the lighting and the design up front to make sure that it's all perfect and that our clients are super happy. And we've been evolving with that throughout the last few years as technology has shifted. And we've learned a lot and really implemented it. And it's been a great journey.
Why is lighting so important in today's luxury home? And what's changed in the last, let's say, 10 years as you've been doing this work?
Yeah. So I think what's important to keep in mind about lighting is that it has many different purposes, right? Lighting is not meant to light a space, It can be task-oriented, it can be to create an ambiance, to create a mood. And as we have more options available, we can reproduce natural light during the day, but also reproduce a more calming candlelight scenario at night, right? So instead of just lighting a space, it's really important that during the day, our home feels like the inside and the outside are one, right? In today's homes, we have more windows, we have more glass, we have more outdoor entertainment, which is a hugely popular topic. And, during the day, how do we bring all of that together to create one ambiance, right? And so that's super important. But then we also have tasks. Sometimes we're cooking, sometimes we're bathing the kids, sometimes we're ready to go to bed or reading a book, right? And it's very important to think about how we're going to use all of those different situations and then be able to create what's needed for each one of those.
When you talk about designing lightings in a home, are you seeing more and more architects and builders getting more knowledgeable about this subject, or is it still very early in the process and there's a lot of good enough solutions out there?
Yeah, I think it still varies quite dramatically today. I think lighting designers are very important. Some of our favorite architects and interior designers who do amazing jobs, they're just not as well versed in what's available in lighting today as lighting designers are. So I think having that extra team member is really important. We're not seeing it on all of our projects yet, and so we are able to provide some of our expertise on existing designs and make some small adjustments. But I think that there is still a gap there. Just like I believe we're a very important consultant, not only for lighting, but for the rest of the low voltage, I think as technology evolves, lighting designers are becoming more important. And so the same as we have engineers, architects, designers, I think that it's really important that these architects and designers start bringing lighting designers on board early, which is something we can help with, but there's also a lot of third parties that do it as well. So I think that's more of the important part of it.
Of the new construction projects that you do today, what % do you think have a lighting designer on them?
It's probably about 50%.
Okay, so you're seeing half. I think that's probably high. In talking to other peers around the industry, I think in other markets you might see 10, 20% of jobs having a lighting designer. Sounds like South Florida is probably a little more progressive in that space.
I actually think we're not. I think we're pretty behind, but what's happened is we have a lot of New York clients, and I think New York is ahead of the curve, right? So it's we're probably close to zero in South Florida and Miami, and they're close to 100 on high-end projects in New York. And so I think we're getting a bit of that blend. So a lot of our New York, Connecticut clients, they're used to having a lighting designer, right? They already understand that importance, and they're bringing them on board. We're also pushing for it, right? If we get a lighting design and we start talking about lighting technology, we have the ability to say, okay, you're using X fixture, let's use Y because here's some better technology that's available today. But it doesn't mean that fixture works in those locations, right? So we will also make that push to really encourage our clients to hire a lighting designer to get the most out of the fixtures that we're recommending.
And you mentioned that you can partner with lighting designers, you can bring lighting designers to the table. What's your favorite way of going about doing that?
About bringing a lighting designer in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really about, coming to a showroom and educating our clients on why that's important, right? Okay. It's not, hey, you should have this. It's, hey, let's go look at the differences. So most people have lived with or in a home that does not have lighting design, right? Probably 99%, even of high-end clients, right? And so when they experience the difference of what lighting design looks like, it's then their choice, right? I always tell people my job is to educate so that the client can make the decision, right? So we're not here to tell you this is what you should have and we want to sell you this. Our job is to educate their clients on what's available today. What does that lighting technology look like? Then we can bring them to our showroom and let them experience that, which is just that next level of education, so they can make the decision, you know what, yes, this is something that I want and I understand why I need a lighting designer, or, hey, Carlton, this stuff is, super cool, but it's not for me. That's fine as well. Doesn't usually happen, but we leave it open.
I don't know many people that have worked with a lighting designer on a project and then done a subsequent project and says, you know what, I'm not going to use a lighting designer.
Never.
It's sort of a very eye-opening experience to say, wow, I had no idea that this was even possible and that could make that much of a difference. For the couple of bucks a square foot or whatever it costs to, for a lighting designer, and certainly there's higher end ones. I don't want to diminish that, but it seems to be a really, really good return on investment when you're building and designing a luxury home.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think without a doubt you nailed it. Nobody's going to do a home without a lighting designer once they've done it with one.
Yeah. So when you're talking to lighting designers, when you're talking to clients, what's new? Like what are you talking to them about when it comes to technology? You mentioned kind of, bringing the daylight in, candlelight ambience, whether it's from a technology standpoint or a style standpoint. What are you seeing and what are you paying a lot of attention to right now?
Yeah, so I think, technology of color light, so to speak, right? So that we can reproduce multiple white color temperatures has been around now for some time. So that's still going to be what we're going to lead with, right? Understanding how to create those scenes. But, for our clients or our professional resources, our designers, our architects that have been doing that with us for a few years now, really what we're starting to focus on is new form factors and the ability to integrate more, right? Okay. Because it's a challenge and it's a battle, but it has been between aesthetic and function, right? So form versus function has been a challenge. So when a designer wants a ceiling to look a specific way and maybe they have some very sleek monopoints and some pinhole fixtures and different things, and technology was available, but the forms were not available, right? Okay. So clients and designers were making that decision, okay, how important is this function to me? Today, we're starting to have more and more ways to utilize the technology, reproduce the ambiance that we're going for, and keep the form, right? So the form and function are finally marrying together, and it's really nice to see, right? So we have LED tape that can integrate perfectly. Now we have monopoints that can integrate, and a lot of different technologies that we can really bring together and create one vibe, right? Before we had challenges with designer fixtures, chandeliers, sconces, right? And so we're talking a lot more now about that than just the hi-hats and the technology because we can blend them together.
And so, so by being able to keep a consistent color temperature, being able to keep a consistent dimming pattern, that's really starting to, that's a reality, whereas it used to be probably a little bit more of a science experiment to make that truly happen in a home.
Yeah, absolutely. It's both that and also education. A lot of homes that we would do initially, we would explain to the designers, okay, when you're selecting a design or fixture like a chandelier or sconce, we need specific types of bulbs, right, to match this ambiance that we're going to create. And if they didn't fully understand why, they kind of selected whatever fixture they wanted. And then when we got to that time where we're setting up the scenes with the client, and there's a huge clash in color temperature, in ambiance, in dim level, and so it was a bit of a science experiment that I think we got pretty good, but then now that education point, right, is starting to come along because people have experienced this and they understand, like, okay, this is a big difference. So if we do this right and we work together, we can use every fixture in the house, right, and we can blend the two together.
You mentioned tape lighting, you mentioned aperture size. What are the trends that you're seeing there? Are people doing more tape lighting? Are they using indirect tape lighting as places that they previously used other fixtures, or are apertures getting, is it 4-inch used to be the right aperture, then it became 3-inch? What are you seeing in terms of aperture size and tape lighting these days?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing more and more tape lighting. It's really going everywhere, right? So both, layers of light is very important. And so whether it's shelving, coves, we do a lot of toe kick lighting now, right? So in a kitchen, you can really get those layers where you have toe kick lighting with the LED tape, you have under counter lighting with the LED tape, you have cove lighting with the LED tape, and then you have your decorative fixtures as well as your hi-hats, which are going to perform more of the task, right? So as these experiences are coming through, people are electing for a lot more tape light throughout their house. And hi-hat apertures are just getting smaller and smaller, right? I would venture to say that today the standard would be a 2-inch fixture. So You still do have smaller options. From my standpoint, I'm a technology guy, so I'm going to try to stray away from those only because there is a function that we can't achieve with the smaller fixtures today, so they do have their place in specific areas. But for the most part, I think 2-inch has become pretty standard at this stage. We've kind of gone away from even the 3-inch, and you can get most of the technology available today in a 2-inch, so it works well.
And so you also mentioned color changing and obviously changeable, tunable whites, reds, whites, and blues. And I think most every customer out there has heard of Philips Hue or has seen a color changing tape light or even a recessed fixture, not a recessed fixture, but a bulb on Amazon. What are your thoughts on those technologies?
So, to start to talk a little bit about color, white is the presence of all colors, right? If you look at a color spectrum, in order to reproduce white, we use red, green, blue. And so in order to accurately recreate white at multiple color temperatures, we have to have the ability to create color, right?
Okay.
So if we're going to create a 3,000 Kelvin light fixture, we can create a CRI of 97. So CRI is the color rendering index. It's going to be how accurate that light is compared to the sun, right? And a great way to judge that is going to be if you look at skin tones. Naturally, as humans, we can tell if skin tones are off or not, right? So if we're going to create that one chip, it can look really good. You can get, let's call it a 97 CRI out of that fixture, 100 being the sun. But once we start to say, okay, we want that fixture to be able to recreate multiple white color temperatures, if we're using different white diodes or LEDs, it's only going to be accurate at each one of those diodes. So if you have an 1800 Kelvin, a 3000 Kelvin, a 5000, that's where it's going to be accurate, right? 4000 Kelvin has a lot of green in it. 5000 Kelvin has a lot of blue in it. So if we're going to have a fixture that is going to recreate candlelight, which is a very orange 1400 Kelvin, but also be able to recreate daylight at 5000 or 6000 Kelvin, we need to be able to use color.
Okay.
Right? So when you have a fixture that can create color, a lot of our clients are like, no. Like, that's not how my house is going to look. I don't need red. I don't need green. I don't need blue. This isn't what I want. And so my job is to educate them on, I understand, but when you have it warmer, you don't want it to look like an orange light, right? You want it to accurately recreate a warm white. And when you want it cooler, you want it to be, the old LEDs, everybody would buy an LED and they'd be blue. It was horrible, right? We don't want to recreate that, right? That's not our goal. So to start, I think it's important to understand that about color. When we look at some of the DIY products that are available today, the biggest challenge is really what they can actually recreate in that white color space. So I won't pick on any specific brand, but some of the most popular ones, they're only going to go down to maybe 2,500 Kelvin, right? Okay. A standard consumer today is most likely selecting between a 2,700 Kelvin and a 3,000 Kelvin light fixture. And so when they're selecting between 2,700 and 3,000 Kelvin, they're selecting, do they want a warmer color temperature or a cooler color temperature? But those color temperatures don't necessarily work for all times of the day, right? They're both too warm to be used during the day to match the outside color temperature, and they're both too cool to really create an ambiance at night. So knowing that 2,700 doesn't work, 2,500 doesn't give you much more, right? And then they'll be able to go really high because they'll crank up that blue chip and maybe they can go to 5,000 Kelvin. But they're really missing those lower level Kelvin. So that's where some of the higher end products come into play, right? Recreating accurately warm color temperatures.
Obviously, if you're doing a chip that or a fixture that has multiple colors, you can still do the reds, greens, blues, and whites. So are you seeing some funky applications and stuff like that where people are using that technology?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Art is a big one that comes into play. So having a high-end fixture that can recreate many colors enables you to introduce slight hues of color and pastels of color instead of the neons that we're used to, right? So if you have a piece of art and we can change the way that we mix the red, green, blue to still create white but add a hue of a specific color, we can completely transform the way that that piece of art looks, right? We can even start to put more candlelight. So some old world art that was actually painted under candlelight, you can put candlelight just on that piece of art. Or if you're having, a specific party that it's going to be a little bit more fun and it's not a, calm dinner party and people are coming over, you can put some red, some green, some blue onto pieces of art while the center of the home, the dining space, the lounge, can still just be a nice warm color temperature, right? So you can create a really fun vibe without it feeling like it's a child's room, And so typically what we do is, we'll come in and we'll tell the client, say, look, let us take a stab at this. Let me create something that I think you'll like, right? I've done this 100 times. We'll recreate it and then see what you think. And usually they're blown away, right? We start to introduce some red or blue into under counter lights in the bar. And you start to introduce like a calming blue in a space. And then majority of the rest of the home is just a very warm 1,800 Kelvin usually color temperature, right? And so I guess you could do red throughout the entire space and, maybe my clients do that when I'm not around. We'll never know. But
throw a disco party or a pink party or something like that.
Yeah. But we are able to use color to create a fun environment, right? And when we use the pastels of color, there's a great demo we do in our showroom that shows how the pastels of color can work in this space. And they work a lot better when the main area is a very warm color temperature, right? It's almost like that orange. When it's white, when it's a 3,000 color, 3,000 Kelvin, and you have a white light in the middle, and then you have these colors, it just doesn't work. But when you have a warm color temperature, it's almost like like an orangey, like a bronze. The rest of the pastel colors can really blend, and it doesn't feel like you would imagine.
You mentioned the demo you have in your showroom. I'll just tell a quick story. We were with another firm out in San Francisco this weekend, and they have a demo of changing that vibrancy scene on a picture. And we were all blown away by what a difference it made by just changing some digital values in a fixture to the painting from going from looking very red to very blue by bringing and accenting that out. I mean, and these are technologists that saw this and were like, oh my gosh, is that the type of capability you have in your showroom today to kind of show people what technology can do to highlight those high-end art pieces or surfaces or, whatever, car collection, whatever it may be?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do that, and we go through the different ranges of how that looks.
And it seems like you have to really experience that. I mean, you can talk about it, you can show a video of it, but until you actually experience it, is that kind of what your experience has been, that clients have to experience that in order to really get it?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's very hard to put into words what happens, right, and what that experience looks like. It's really hard.
So obviously you guys have been designing and installing systems and servicing systems for a long time. Here we are in 2025. What are some of your favorite solutions and products that you guys go to today? So if a client approaches you and says, hey, we want to do a nice lighting system in our house, and here's our lighting designer, where are you going to start from a product standpoint?
Yeah, so I think it's important to, instead of starting with the product, we start with the user experience.
Okay.
Right? So we're going to understand what that user experience should be, both from a control standpoint. How is that system going to operate? Does that client want to touch buttons? Do they not want to touch buttons, right? Do they want to be able to have individual control through a color wheel on an app or not? How are they going to use this system, And then we select products from there. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of great products today, and technology is moving at light speed with all of these technologies in lighting that we're talking about. But they can't all deliver the same user experience just because they can reproduce a specific white color temperature accurately, or many different colors, right? So if we're going to be doing as Lutron calls it, a natural show, right, where the lights are going to change with you throughout the day, there's very few products that are compatible with that, right? So if the client, which is my favorite way to do it, right? So if the client is intent on, yes, we want a natural show, right? We're going to select Ketra products that integrate with that. Now, some of our clients, and a lot of this comes back to the lighting designer as well, they don't necessarily want the lights to change automatically. Maybe we're going to give them 3 buttons on the wall. We're going to have a day, a night, and a relaxed scene, right?
Okay.
If that's how the user experience and that's how the client's going to interact with their system, we have different products that we'll use, right? So now, because we're recalling a set color temperature or a set color, a set sequence from that button, I can use a lot more fixtures. So, right, we have to play with the two to, it's still not perfect form function, right? But now if, it's more important for that client to have a specific looking mono point, and that mono point is not a Ketra fixture, but it has red, green, blue, white capabilities, and the client would like to experience it through multiple buttons, I can do that. If they're intent on a natural show, we have to have that conversation, qualify the client, and understand that, right? So I have this conversation with manufacturers a lot. I actually had it with one yesterday where they came in and showed us a bunch of products that theoretically all do what we're talking about, and then you start to ask how we're supposed to use that product and what that client experience is like, and it kind of falls flat, right? So hopefully that answers the question a bit. There's a lot, and the design is very important. That design portion is very important.
So you mentioned Lutron, you mentioned Ketra. What are some of the other go-to brands that you guys use and work with on a regular basis?
Yeah, so
fixture types or tape types or.
Yeah, we do a lot of, so Lutron, Ketra, fixtures, monopoints, tape lighting. We also do a lot with Prolux. So Prolux has an incredible assortment of LED tape lights that we can utilize, environmental light for LED tape. We also have DMF, who makes amazing fixtures, right? So they have all different ways to control those fixtures. That's a fixture that when we're selecting multiple buttons, as we talked about, works really well, has a lot of different form factors with the same technology. And then there's WAC lighting that we do a lot with. They have a lot of options that we're talking about, as well as warm dim technology. So typically in a home, you're not going to have full-blown red, green, blue, white technology in the entire space, right? Number one, it's a bit of an overkill. Number two, budget constraints, regardless of the budget, start to come into play. And so in secondary areas in bedrooms, we're able to do a warm dim technology, and that's where we'll use a lot of DMF and WAC, as well as Lutron lights, right? Just depending. But those would be the main brands that we're really after.
And you also mentioned control. So I've got to think that as this technology becomes more involved and you talk about color temperatures and color and time of day, control becomes a even more important aspect than it used to be, right? I mean, it used to be, yeah, you could push a control system, you could push one button and light the lights the way you want it. Now you've got time of day and all this stuff. What are you primarily using for control? And what are clients asking for when it comes to lighting control? Is it still a keypad on the wall? Do they want voice control? You mentioned a color wheel. Is it all of the above?
So I think clients want simplicity, especially, the first question that every client asks after I get done with my demo in the showroom is, how in the world am I supposed to control that, right? Like, I've shown you, 20 different scenarios of different color temperatures, and it's daunting, right? So I think to start, all clients want keypads on the wall, right?
Okay.
Typically, there are exceptions. Typically, nobody's going to control their lights on a daily basis through their phone, right? Or through an app or through a touch panel. They want to walk into a space, push the button, and the light should do what they want them to do. Or I really like occupancy sensors, right? So the way that we, by default, program our lighting systems is either a high, medium, low button in a space, or what we like to call hello, energize, and relax, right, which we developed working with some lighting designers. And so when you walk into a space, if you were to select that hello button, that button is going to be a natural show, so it's going to bring the lights to the color temperature and dim level that we have predetermined with the client they should be at that time of the day.
So if I hit that hello button at 8 a.m., it's going to be the way the light should be at 8 a.m. And if I hit it at 5 p.m., it's going to adjust to that temperature and brightness and intensity of a 5 p.m. That's a really good idea, because too often I think people say high, medium, and low or something along those lines. And so that, what you said, it was your hello button that's your top button? Yeah, that's a great idea.
Right. And then, we try to answer other scenarios that clients are going to have. Again, on a daily basis, we're not going to accomplish everything somebody wants to do through a keypad. So we're just talking about everyday living. Sometimes you walk into the kitchen and it's late at night. Maybe you got home late, you want to cook some dinner, you hit that hello button, and it's a very warm, dim light that doesn't support your task, right? You can hit that energize button and it's going to bring it up to a bright, cool level. Or sometimes it's the opposite, right? And you're chilling, you went to grab something, you can select that relax button, and it's going to give you a warmer tone of that, right? So it's kind of a new techie way of doing high, medium, low, essentially, right? Think of it as a medium, high, and then low, but we're also bringing in color temperature and time of day into this. And so that is our standard and our default of how we like to program things. You then have unlimited capabilities through your phone. So if you want to change what one light is doing, you can. But we're going to program typically about 5 to 10 scenes on your phone that you can select at any time. So a dinner time scene, a entertain scene, a good night scene, right, where the whole house will do something specific, or a specific room will do something specific. So you always have access to those. Let's say you're going to use those once a week, whereas the other buttons you're going to use almost daily.
So you're not going to waste the real estate on a keypad with an entertain scene that I might only use once a week. I can easily pull that up in my phone instead of lose the real estate on the keypad for it.
Exactly. And then you also have the ability for that entertain scene to do more than just lighting, right? You can turn down the AC. A lot of people are coming. The music will turn on. The shades might do something specific, right? So we can broaden that scope of what's happening. And then I think the most important way to control lights in today's world is really with sensors, right? It's my belief, and I don't always win this battle, but it's my belief that every bathroom, every closet, every secondary space that you're going to utilize should have an occupancy sensor, right? Okay. In my home, when I walk into the bathroom, the lights turn on to a specific level, but they do it based on the time of day, right? So it's a simple program in this state. It's essentially all on from 7 a.m. to 8 or 9 p.m., whatever I have it set at. And then after that, it's a very dim level. So if you decide to get up to use the restroom at 1 a.m., your LEDs under your vanity are going to turn on. If you have a cove light, it's going to turn on. If you have a step light in the toilet room, it's going to turn on, and that's it, right? So we're going to try to keep the light out of your eye level, just create a natural dim glow, and go from there, right? So I think that's, super powerful. Doesn't work in bedrooms, living rooms, necessarily things like that. But I think that all bathrooms, all closets, you shouldn't have to interact with a piece of hardware.
That's interesting. I mean, that I remember the days when occupancy sensors were like, that was high-end technology. And it's almost like you're recommending kind of going back to that in the sense of, hey, sometimes back to the basics of, if you're in the space, it should illuminate, right?
Yeah.
But it should illuminate at the right level. I think that's the
Absolutely.
important piece. So,
Yeah, without a doubt.
when you get called into a project, or you see a house that maybe they didn't hire a lighting designer, or they what's the 4 cans and a fan or a bank of switches. I mean, where are you seeing people get it wrong? Is it that they're not investing in planning up front? Is it they just don't know what's there? Where do you see clients, architects, builders get it wrong when it comes to lighting?
So I think there's 2 main things. I think the first mistake is education, right? Typically not from our professional resources. Maybe they don't fully understand the technology that's available, but we're going to assume that most of them are well educated on lighting in general. But if the client isn't pushing for that, a lot of times an engineer, somebody will do that lighting design, right? And their goal is to ensure that you have enough light, right? Enough lumens and foot lamperts in a space to light it and for it to be safe, right? Mm-hmm. And if somebody hasn't experienced the difference, they're going to be okay with that. The other thing that we see from our designers, our architects, is they design for the ceiling, okay? So this is a very, very difficult conversation to have when a lighting designer or myself will ask somebody to place a light that maybe isn't perfectly symmetrical, right? I'm not telling you to throw lights all over the ceiling, but if you have a hallway in a kitchen, right, or a passageway between an island and a countertop, everybody's going to want those lights right there in the center. Mm-hmm. Well, that creates a shadow from the back of your head when you're using the countertop, right? So unless you have another light in the middle, that light should really be on the edge of the countertop, right? And so when you look at a lot of these concepts, same thing, we see it all the time in family rooms and living rooms. And if there's a decorative ceiling, they want the lights in a specific place for the ceiling to look a specific way. And that ceiling typically does look beautiful. However, those lights don't serve a purpose other than illuminating a space, right? The people, designers, architects, they love to put these double fixtures, right? Yep. They look really nice. They look really modern. And if done properly and they're adjustable, they can have a function, don't get me wrong. But they usually aren't, right? They're placed symmetrically within the space. And so we have to show clients that, hey, the lights can be out of the airplane, runway grid that you're used to, still look good, but now they serve a function, right? So many times I'll sit down in a family room at a client's house, and that light will just be right above me. And they have the most beautiful coffee table, and there's nothing over it, right? Not even a decorative fixture. Or sometimes there is a decorative fixture, but nobody took into consideration that coffee table. And so the decorative fixture looks beautiful, the ceilings look incredible, but nobody's appreciating, the veins in this Italian stone coffee table that took, 6 months to get here, came, on 3 trains, 2 cars, and a plane, and is really magnificent, but it just doesn't pop, right? Because we designed for the ceiling.
Or you've set up a social setting, a family room, a living room, whatever it is, and the light is not appropriately lighting the people's faces, right? You're getting
Correct.
shadowing everywhere, and which completely, it really changes the ambiance and mood of a space, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. I mean, it's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
But you have to experience that. You don't know. A lot of times we do restaurants once in a while, and a lot of times, when you're in a restaurant, you don't know why you like, right? The vibe. What's the vibe of the restaurant? I love restaurants with good vibe. What makes the vibe? There's not one thing that makes a good vibe, right? You got to have even music. You have to be able to have a conversation. The lighting has to be comfortable, right? Every time you move your hand or your fork, you don't want to shadow over your food. These aren't things that anybody, including myself, really pick out. We just say, yeah, the food was good, but there's so many things that go into it, and shadows play a huge role.
Yeah,
huge role.
The one thing that most high-end luxury restaurants have in common from an aesthetic standpoint is they do a really, really good job of lighting design. Like you said, there's no shadows. There's the plates are perfectly illuminated. The faces are perfectly illuminated of the people that are having a conversation. It's very much, I guess it's an art and a science now. It used to be more of a science, but definitely an art. So
Absolutely.
you mentioned, so one of the things I always like to do on this podcast is talk to people about the technology in their own homes. So you mentioned you've got occupancy sensors. What kind of lighting do you have in your own home, and how do you control it, and what are your favorite aspects of lighting?
Yeah. As I said, I'm super passionate about it. I was lucky enough to be able to build a home recently, and so I was able to put all the technology really into it, right? In our common areas, we have catcher lighting that changes color temperature throughout. We have cove lighting, we have toe kick lighting. My favorite thing about it is absolutely at night when everything starts to come down naturally and you really feel it get warmer and more comfortable and cozier. And people really notice, right? Like friends come over, they don't know why. They're like, wow, it feels so great in here, They have no idea why. Most of my friends couldn't tell you the difference between 1800 Kelvin and 4000 Kelvin, right? A lot of it does take that education. But just that transformation from day to night is absolutely my favorite part. I have occupancy sensors everywhere, kind of like I mentioned, and so that's great. Guests walk into the bathroom to powder room, and that light goes exactly as that powder room was intended to be, right? So a lot of times somebody's going to come in, if they have to press a button and they press it again and they press it again, and they don't even get to appreciate that fade up and the fade down of the lights turning on or off, or what dim level the mirror light should be at versus the overhead lights versus the vanity lights. And so it's all set up. Nobody can mess it up. It always looks great, right? So you walk into the powder room and those lights are slowly going to turn on, create a nice ambiance, and they go away. So I think it's really powerful. Another thing that we did that's very hard to do is we only selected decorative fixtures that were compatible with bulbs that had the same technology as the rest of the home. Okay. So when our decorative fixtures are on, they're also coming down in color temperature and changing throughout the day. And it really makes the world of difference.
Yeah, that consistency. When you're in a house that is well lit and has consistent color temperature, you're right. You probably don't notice it if you're not familiar with it. But if you compare that and the experience to a house that's got 4,000 Kelvin tape light and 2,200 decorative fixtures, it just doesn't look good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a problem. And to touch, on the controls other than the occupancy sensors, we touch very few buttons. So in our bedroom, we have, two buttons essentially that we use, which is like a day and a nighttime button. The top day button will naturally change based on the time, but sometimes we just want a cozier vibe earlier on. Maybe we're going to bed early or we're going to sit down to watch a movie. So, we touch that. We have a button that turns off all the lights downstairs when you get to the top of the stairs. And then we have a good night button. And the only other button we use is at the bottom of the stairs. We have a hello button that turns on the great room space, right? And then that will change throughout the day without ever touching another button. So I have a lot of keypads that don't get used. They're there. Everybody, clients, including myself, we're always hesitant to say, oh yeah, let's just not put a keypad there at all, right? It's like, wait a minute. Like, no, I need to be able to control the lights in that space. And so a lot of keypads that aren't used, but they work.
Are you using your phone and the app a lot to control lights, or do you find that you've been able to dial it in, the programming, the keypads for your personal experience, though otherwise, other than that, once a week party scene or whatever that you might do, how much are you relying on your phone to control the lights?
Very little, only for specific scenarios. So we will do it for when we're entertaining or for a dinner party. Other than that, it's completely dialed in. I mean, it does take time. We spent a lot of time adjusting it. Obviously, I have the luxury of I decide I want to adjust something, I open my computer, I do it, and it's done. But we really encourage our clients to spend time with us and understand that importance. Like, it does take time, but nobody's lived in that home before. No matter how good your designer or my team is, like, nobody's lived in that home, right? It's not going to be right until we spend the time together in the evening hours, and in summer that can be hard. A lot of our clients move in summer. It doesn't get dark until 8:30, and so we ask them to commit sometimes until 10:30, 11 o'clock at night to really go through these spaces. But you spend 3-4 hours and you have the next 10 to 20 years of living in this home with perfect light, and it makes a huge difference.
Well, as we wrap up the conversation today, if you were to give one piece of advice to somebody who's building a new home and is intrigued by what they heard today, or is interested in how lighting has changed and evolved, where would you encourage them to go for resources or planning or knowledge? What are some of your favorite sources out there? Who would you turn to?
I think you should find a trusted integrator first and early. Right? There's so much out there. And even if I give you a website today, for instance, by the time this podcast airs, there's going to be change of technology, right? And so I think it's important that you interview a couple integrators and you really select the one that you are most comfortable with, and don't be afraid to learn. Okay. A lot of clients, they really want me to, they don't want to spend the time. They don't understand the importance of what it is that we're talking about. And so they say, okay, well, just propose what you think, right? Think you should spend time with integrators. Ask them questions about how they live, right? What have they done with other clients? What are their favorite things that they've done for other clients? And what are those clients' favorite things, right? Understand and find somebody that you feel good with and that those answers jive with your lifestyle, right? And then rely on them and spend the time to help that integrator understand what your family is like, how you live, if you like to entertain, right? And really spend that time, because I don't think it happens anywhere near often enough.
I'm guessing from your answer to that question that you a lot of times run into a client that just says, yep, do what you want, and then you do what you would do, and it may not be consistent with what they would do. And that can lead to probably a sort of, kind of reaction when it's done, versus those that spend the time, probably appreciate it, and are the ones that refer more business and are super, super happy with the next 10, 15 years of the lighting in their home.
Absolutely, without a doubt. We're at the stage where if we can't go through those steps, right, we'll kind of start to back away and say, like, listen, Mr. Client, like, I understand that you're ready to write us a check, and I'm happy that but if we can't meet your expectations, right, and if we don't understand what your expectations are, it won't work for either of us, right? Our entire business is based on happy customers and referrals. And why should they spend all that money and then not get it, right? And a lot of times they'll be like, oh, okay, and they'll come and they'll hang out for 2 or 3 hours, or a couple meetings, It's just really important. We're the only sub that after the home is done, we're still with you, We're going to tailor that home to exactly how you want it to be. You're not going to move electrical outlets. You're probably not going to change your plumbing. You're definitely not going to, adjust your ACs unless something happens, in 10 years. But those aren't things that you're interacting with every day. Lighting is something you interact with every day. You want to get it right.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Carlton, thank you very much for being here with us today and being on the Intelligent Estate. If people want to get a hold of you, I'll go ahead and put your contact information and your company's website up here. I guess I will ask one other question, or just quick question. You said get involved early. What's early mean? When should I get somebody involved?
So planning stages, right? Once you've selected your architect, maybe you've selected your interior designer, start having conversations with an integrator, right? Because you're not going to get a proposal and you're not going to give any money at that stage, but you're going to start understanding what's available, becoming educated, to then have those conversations with the architect. Because so many times we get plans that are completely done, and it's like, okay, well, you said you want to do X, that's going to take Y, which means we have to go back to your architect and no, like I'm already in construction drawings, right? Whereas, I can't speak for every integrator, but if somebody calls you up and says, hey, what's available, we can say, hey, yeah, tell your architect that, we're going to need this. Tell your electrical engineer we're going to need this. And we can just get a step ahead of the game. And then as those design drawings progress, now you should get a design drawing done from the integrator, right? So many times we're in way too late. And then things that wouldn't have cost more money just can't be done, right? Without setting back the clock and redoing time. And time is very hard. And so, hire early, get your integrator on board, and find somebody that you trust. Don't pick your system, don't pick your products, pick your integrator, all right?
I think that's very, very sage advice. So, well, Carlton, thank you very much for being with us here today. I've enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for enlightening us. No, pun absolutely.
Pun intended for sure.
Yeah, pun intended for sure. So, thank you,
Thanks
Carlton.
for having me.
Sincerely appreciate it. That was a really fun conversation with Carlton. I really enjoyed learning more about the role of lighting designers and how important it is to really see and experience some of this technology in a showroom to see what it can actually bring to your home. Before we get to the wrap up here, I've got a couple of listener questions that I'd like to address. First off is Paul in Las Vegas, who asked, what's the best way to future-proof my smart home investment so I don't have to upgrade everything in 2 years? It's a great question. I get this a lot. Technology certainly has changes. It's going to evolve, it's going to mature, it's going to get better. And with that comes an upgrade cycle. I think you should be thinking about technology upgrades not every 2 years, but probably every 4 to 6 years when it comes to things like televisions in your home, Wi-Fi networking equipment advances. You're probably on the lower end of things there. Control systems, these new modern control systems seem to have upgrades every 4 to 5 years. So I would really think about technology obsolescence in kind of a 4 to 6 year time frame. Things like security systems, you're not going to need to upgrade those or replace those. Lighting control systems, no, you've got 10, 15 years of expected life there. But for some of the more advanced parts, like I said, televisions, Wi-Fi networking equipment, cameras, higher resolutions, I think a 4 to 6 year investment time frame is about right. The most important thing to do is make sure you get the right wire and infrastructure in place so that when you are ready to upgrade, it can support that. The second question comes from Denise in Austin. She asks, is it worth investing in whole home automation systems like Control4, Savant, or Crestron, or can I get the same results with consumer level devices like Apple Home or Google Home? Denise, this is a great question, and it's something I used to spend a lot of times educating our consumers on. It really depends upon what you want to do. If you want one app to control everything and automate and curate your experience, centralized control systems like Control4, Savant, Crestron are going to give you that experience. If you want to control a light in the home or a specific shade or a specific room, you can certainly do that with a point solution like Apple Home or Google Home, but you're not going to get a lot of the same curated experiences. It also boils down to what you want from a user standpoint. If you like controlling things from your phone, Apple Home, Google Home, all of the control systems can do that. But if you like having a dedicated touch panel or a remote control, you're kind of put into the centralized control systems, and they do those functions very, very well. A lot of homes that we do not only have centralized control systems, but would also use Apple Home or Amazon Alexa for certain point solutions. So I would highly recommend that you talk to an integrator, a high-level home technology professional about the pros and cons of both. You really can't go wrong with either one. It's really a matter of what your lifestyle is and what your experiences are. Coming up in our next episode, we'll be talking with Kyle Steele from Global Wave Technologies about high-end home cinema and the trends he is seeing in large format LED walls. It used to be when you were doing high-end home cinema, it was a really nice projector, but now we're starting to see these large format video walls start to take over. Kyle's going to come on and talk about some of the trends that he's seeing in major estates across the United States. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a quick rating or review. It helps more design lovers, homeowners, and tech-forward thinkers find the show. And if you've got a question or an idea or just want to show off your own intelligent estate, reach out to us on Instagram at the Intelligent Estate Podcast. I'd love to hear from you and maybe even feature your question in an upcoming episode. Thanks for engaging with us today. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.